Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Mind Muscle Connection podcast. Today I have a very special guest, Lauren Colenso-Semple. And if you aren't familiar with Lauren, she is currently pursuing, and she actually just told me off air, she's wrapping up her PhD in integrative physiology at McMaster University. Her research focuses on the impact of exercise, nutrition, and hormones on skeletal muscle. Lauren has worked with hundreds of clients in person and online, including recreational lifters, moms-to-be, and aspiring powerlifters and physique athletes. So
I'm so sorry. My dogs are going crazy. So I think we just need to pause. I'm going to put them away and we can.
So yeah, I appreciate you coming on the podcast today and taking time out of your day. If you don't mind, maybe just hit on your background and how you got into this, and that will set the tone for today's conversation.
Thanks so much for having me on. I really appreciate it. I got a bachelor's degree in psychology, after which I worked in business development in tech, so very unrelated. But I got into personal training and teaching group fitness just for fun at the time. And once I became more familiar with the existence of research related to strength and hypertrophy, I was really excited about that area of science. And I ultimately left my regular job and I started working full-time in fitness and volunteered in Brad Schoenfeld's lab for a year and subsequently decided to go back to school to pursue a graduate degree in exercise science. So I spent 2 years in Tampa with Bill Campbell at the University of South Florida, and then I moved to Canada to pursue a PhD at McMaster with Dr. Stu Phillips. So I'm just finishing that up now, and my primary focus for my PhD has been looking at the muscle growth response in women, and more specifically, the influence of sex hormones on the adaptations to resistance training.
Awesome. Yeah. Like I said off air, I know you've been doing a lot of work around the menstrual cycle and training around that. You have a ton of information out on that. We can redirect people to that. But like I said, also is I know you have a good background here on hypertrophy, and I think that's one of the main reasons why I wanted to bring you on here and whatnot. So appreciate you sharing that. So I guess as far as like your training and nutrition goes, is there anything that you work on specifically? I always like to just ask a new guest there what they focus on with that. Do you have any like aspiring goals there, or yeah, what does that look like for you? Especially now that you are wrapping up your PhD, I'm assuming that probably takes up a lot of time as well too.
It does. I think before I went back to school, I was hyper focused on really optimizing my diet and training for hypertrophy. But being in grad school is pretty demanding. So I have to say my level of commitment has shifted such that I really train now just for general fitness. And for better or for worse, I think I'm more balanced now. I think probably many of the listeners have gone through or are currently going through a phase where it feels like the most important thing. And generally, while those phases are fun, they don't last forever. And ultimately, we hope that you come to a kind of more balanced place where you still enjoy fitness, but maybe it's not the only thing.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I guess for you then, what does that kind of balance look like? Is it just like less training days? Is it just less focus on your nutrition? What does that look like for you?
When I'm in the lab and doing the analysis with the muscle tissue, it's incredibly time consuming and I don't have a lot of control over my schedule. So those days I will often just not train. But I think I've also become more flexible in the training frequency or in having a really structured program. Sometimes I do things that are a bit more flexible. But the primary goal is just to maintain my level of fitness and continue to get a little stronger, put on a little more muscle mass, but doing that in a way that is balanced with the priority for me, right, which is finishing my degree right now.
Right. Yeah, I've had a few people on that have been pursuing their PhD, and basically it's the same type of thing. It's right now the physique aspect side of things has definitely taken a backseat to that. So is that like hypertrophy kind of style training there on that you will typically do, or is it maybe like a blend of some strength work as well as maybe some like cardiovascular work as well too? Yeah, I'm curious to hear that.
Yeah, I typically focus on hypertrophy work. I did go through some phases where I was doing a lot more powerlifting style training, but I tend to be prone to injuries. And so I realized that probably wasn't, and upon reflection, I might say my programming wasn't ideal, and I was perhaps chasing the strength bug in a way that could have been more intelligently designed from a programming perspective. But I've found that doing a lot of really heavy barbell work, like the risk benefit ratio for me personally is such that I'm not really doing a lot of that anymore.
Yeah, making that switch. That seems to be as we progress over our training career. I feel like that usually is the move where from what I hear from a lot of people, it's like a little less barbell work, a little bit more machine type work and whatnot there with that. So cool. Appreciate you sharing that. I think it's really cool to just hear how you balance everything and whatnot there. So I think this is actually a good time to dive into one of the topics I wanted to bring you on for. You were just talking about, you did at one point do a lot of barbell work. And so it's this concept of when people get in, think when they want to build muscle or whatever it may be, that, oh, hey, you need to do like free weight exercises. Like they're just superior for building muscle or strength. And maybe we can hit on both of those. And so I wanted to bring you on here to talk about the research around that. You know what it says there around that. I'll hand it over to you in terms of maybe the lay of the land of maybe what some common myths are around it, and then the research around it currently.
I remember as a newer trainer and certainly as a lifter, there was a sense that if you weren't doing your barbell squat, bench, and deadlift, what were you doing? And so I think that machine-based training what was looked down upon in a lot of the fitness environments that I was in. And I always really liked machine training, but I felt like, oh, you're not supposed to be doing that, or there's something lesser about doing that. And I would say now I love machines. I don't love all machines, but I think that there are some exercises that are just really well suited to doing, work on machines. And so when we look at the adaptations that you can get from a free weight exercise versus a similar machine-based exercise, we actually see very similar muscle growth and also a transfer of strength gains from something like a barbell squat to a machine hack squat and vice versa, for example. So I think my opinion, based on the state of the literature at this point, is that obviously if you're doing any kind of strength-based competition that requires you to perform your high intensity snatch or deadlift, etc., then you need to be training in a sports specific way, which obviously is going to require performing that free weight exercise. But if you're training for hypertrophy or you're just training for kind of general overall fitness, then I think machines can certainly have a place in your training. And particularly for maximizing hypertrophy, you probably want to have some machine-based work, given that isolating your quadriceps, for example, pretty difficult to do with free weights, whereas the leg extension machine is designed specifically for that. So I think when it comes to designing your program, assuming that either hypertrophy is your goal or general fitness is your goal, we can really incorporate our preferences and also consider things like time efficiency. Doing barbell exercises it often requires quite a bit of setup that a machine-based exercise doesn't. Sometimes machine-based exercises are easier to superset if you're in a gym-based setting. But of course, if you are somebody who has a home gym, then maybe getting a bunch of machines isn't realistic. And then you'd want something like a set of dumbbells or a barbell and a squat rack, because you can get more bang for your buck with those machines or those pieces of equipment, if you will.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Cool. So really the research shows that from a hypertrophy standpoint, either one is going to elicit hypertrophy, whether it's, again, free weights or machines there. A couple things you hit on there. There is some carryover from machines to free weights as well, right? I know you said free weight to, like you said, a squat to a leg press, but can it be vice versa as well too, where a leg press could potentially carry over to like a back squat as well too, or does it not work that way?
We do see the transfer in both directions when the exercise movement patterns are similar. So if you were to do something like a leg extension and a barbell squat, those aren't similar enough, even though, yeah, they're both leg exercises. And arguably a leg press isn't as similar to a squat as a machine squat. So something like a hack squat where you're standing, the movement pattern is very similar. So when we see that transfer, it's for strength, it's often when the movement patterns are as similar as they can be with certain restraints. But it's really interesting because some people would think, oh, that there's no transfer from machine work to the barbell work or the free weight work. But really, as long as the movement pattern is similar, you might have to work a little bit on the technique. Things like unracking the bar are not something that you have to do when you do a hack squat. So I think that we shouldn't assume that it's a kind of one-to-one carryover, but the research does show that an 8-week training program, if you have a free weight group and a machine group and you test them before and after on both free weight and machine exercises, that you get stronger on the specific modality in which you were training and also on the like exercises of the other variety.
Yeah, so I guess with that, if you're training that movement, obviously you're going to get stronger on it if you're overloading and whatnot. But there is, so long as the movement is somewhat similar, there could be a little bit of a transfer there from that. But the key being that it needs to be somewhat similar to what you're doing there, for there to be that kind of carryover from machines to like the free weights, essentially.
That's right.
Cool. I know you hit on a few benefits here of using like machines over free weights, because I think really at the end of the day, this gives people a lot more options to work with when it comes to hypertrophy, right? They're not like, oh, hey, I have to go do these free weights. I think that's great. I think if we can have more flexibility, that's super beneficial. So I know you listed a couple benefits there of like time efficiency, I know was one of them and whatnot. Would there be any other benefits to like using something like machine-based exercises for like hypertrophy over like free weights?
I think for new lifters, machines are great because there are certain free weight exercises where the technicality of it requires a pretty large learning curve. And there can be potential safety issues with barbell exercises that you don't have with machines. And so I think that if somebody is a beginner and maybe doesn't have a personal trainer and is just looking to get in the gym and get some productive workouts done, that machines are a really viable option. And the sort of potential downsides are not similar to those of some free weight exercises, particularly the barbell exercises, because machines lock you in to a position. And so you're less likely to do that tiny tweak of your low back or something that you might in a free weight exercise. I also think that there's you can do a more time efficient circuit based workout if you want to hit full body, for example. And if you're doing circuits, you can reduce your rest intervals. And so for somebody who is just trying to get in and do some training, or maybe they're doing some endurance training and they want to supplement that with some resistance training, then I think you should definitely feel free to hit the machines. That said, not all machines are great for every body type. As a shorter person, I find that there are some machines where I can't reach the handles, or my legs aren't long enough. They're just not designed for somebody with my anthropometry. And so you need to find machines that work for you. I also think one thing to keep in mind is if you are using machines, the movement pattern or the kind of resistance arc is not necessarily the same from one machine to the next. So you would want to be aware of that if you're tracking your loads and think, oh, how come I'm not getting stronger? It's not really a fair assessment unless you are using the same machine every single time.
Yeah, no, that's a good point you bring up because I will have clients bring that up all the time and people I talk to, oh, I can do this amount of weight on this one. And I went down this week and it's just that little change there can make a big difference in terms of your progression. So I'm glad you brought that up. If you are using different machines, you do need to account for that. Cool. So I guess there's obviously the of using more machines. Again, like you said, for somebody that's newer, that's going to be super helpful there to get the potential technique down because there's less risk of injury and kind of messing up your technique there. Would you say there's any, and you may have just hit on this too, is there any other potential like cons to using machines from a hypertrophy standpoint? Or do you think that again, like maybe just that one of not every machine could fit you is really the biggest one there?
Yeah, I think that if the machine doesn't really fit your body type, or you're not really comfortable with the setup, or you feel like it's not locking you in, then that's probably not the best choice for you. I'd say the other thing to keep in mind is when it comes to the machine training, is often it reduces your range of motion. And so what you might be able to or prefer to do in terms of the stretch that you get before the next rep of a row, or how far back your elbow would go on a chest fly, that if you're cutting your range of motion short due to the settings of the machine, or the machine settings are just not tweaked appropriately for you, then you're probably missing some of the benefit, because we do want to get as full a range of motion as we can and as is kind of comfortable for us. So that would be one of the potential downsides for machine training. But I think that can be resolved by just finding a machine and adjusting the settings that are appropriate for you.
Yeah, it's almost like the pro of it also can potentially be a con of it as well too, in terms of, yeah, it does help you with that kind of fixed range of motion, but sometimes depending on the certain machine, that fixed range of motion can be I guess not detrimental, but you're just not going to get everything out of it that you could if you used free weights there. What would be, sorry, I lost my train of thought there. I had a good question I wanted to ask you off of that. So what would be some like other things that you're potentially looking for in a machine? Is there anything else that you would be looking for specifically in terms of that, just something that maybe has that fixed range of motion, but also something that you can make sure that you do get that full range of motion in? Is there anything else that maybe you would look for in a machine for hypertrophy?
The cable crossover is one of my favorite machines, just because it is so adjustable. And so you can just tweak it so that it's maybe starts at a lower position. You can do similar exercises that are with the position just a little bit up or down in a way that you can in a lot of other machines. And you can't in a lot of free weights, because you can adjust where the resistance is coming from. And so you can think about doing something like a face pull. The resistance that you're getting from the cable crossover and the angle that you can set as your starting point is superior to that of a dumbbell rear delt exercise, where it's not even challenging until the last maybe 30% of the range of motion. So I think there's a lot of exercises like that where cables are actually superior to free weights.
So you would almost lump, because I was actually going to ask about cables specifically. So you would lump cables within that kind of machine. Yeah, like you would put cables under machines as well too there.
I would, because it is fixed, right? So it's not, the definition of a free weight would be it's not attached to anything. You're holding it in free space.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah, because I was going to ask about that. So again, you'd put those in there, and again, that's something that I've definitely implemented more in my training recently, is more cable work, and that's been super helpful. I know that there's been a lot of research on like stretch mediated hypertrophy, and like one of the benefits of doing something like a lateral raise on the cable is that you can get that kind of tension in that lengthened position there, which, like you said, you can't really do that with a dumbbell. So some benefit there with that. Cool. So as far as like a ratio goes in terms of like free weights to cables, do you maybe have anything there that you would follow? Or is, again, this just going to be based on the individual and where they're at and like what they have access to?
Yeah, I think it's certainly based on, first and foremost, their goal. If the goal involves something that can only be accomplished with a free weight, then of course we need to include that as an exercise. And then, as you say, the access to equipment. If you're training at a big commercial gym, then you likely have access to a lot of equipment. But if you're maybe at a smaller gym, or if you're training at home, or if you're trying to build a garage gym or something like that, then your options will be more limited. And so I think that that a program can certainly be adjusted based on all of those considerations. If you have access to everything, then personal preference should come into play. And when I work with clients, some of them will just say, I hate that exercise. And I'm
Yeah.
like, great, let's do something else, because there is no must do exercise. And there's no reason to continue to do an exercise that just doesn't feel right, or it bothers your elbow or shoulder, or there's always an alternative that can address whatever the issue is. So I think that throwing machines into the mix is really nice, because you might find that up to a certain point, a goblet squat is a great exercise for you. And then you develop a certain amount of strength, or you're like, oh, the limiting factor is me holding this big dumbbell or trying to get it out of the rack. And maybe at that point you would want to switch to something that allows you to continue to progress the load, but maybe you're not comfortable doing a barbell squat. Cool. There are Smith machine squat, hack squat, leg press. I think there are plenty of situations like that where we can adjust as needed, and of course based on preference as well. And based on setting up hip thrusts, for example, takes forever. And if you have access to a hip thrust machine, either a plate loaded one or a selectorized one, then that saves a ton of time and it targets the glutes in exactly the same way. So I always encourage people to try out different exercises, and based on their feedback, then we can adjust accordingly. And usually it ends up being a mix of free weight and machine exercises. And of course, if you are looking to maximize hypertrophy, then I think we need to include some machine exercises, particularly to isolate legs, and in some case, and also shoulders. Like I love a lateral raise machine. It targets the delts in a way that you just don't get with the dumbbells.
Yeah, no, those were good points. The hip thrust, like that's a perfect one there, where it's if I find out a client has that, it's like, all right, we're doing that one, because I feel like you can really, like you said, the setup is just so much easier, and like it's just more comfortable as well too. And then I also like that you brought up the legs too, because that definitely is one where, people get like a home gym, or they just don't have access to machines, and legs just always end up being a little bit tougher to program for if you don't have a machine. So I do see how having that for the legs can be super beneficial there. One aspect of this too that I haven't asked on yet that I'm curious on, and I'm sure this will also alter the ratio, is what are the fatigue costs? Would you say it's just going to depend on the machine, or would you say in general machines end up being a little less fatiguing overall, or what does that kind of look like? Or is this again going to come down to maybe just how intensely you're training and whatnot?
Yeah, I think if we're talking about the fatigue to the muscle, then if you're doing a leg extension, you're going to fatigue your quad really quickly. That's the best targeted way, right? But you're probably not getting out of breath from doing that. So if we're looking at fatigue on the overall system, then when we think of barbell exercises, just the requirement to stabilize the upper body while you're doing a lower body exercise, for example, is such that you are fatiguing the erectors and the traps, and there's often even some grip strength or kind of wrist stabilization involved that you're not dealing with if you're doing a like exercise on a machine. So I think that's important to be aware of when you're thinking about overall programming, and injury risk as well. If you're starting to do things like really high volumes, then your likelihood of potentially injuring yourself is going to be greater if you're doing a lot of heavy barbell work. So at that point, you might want to have a bit of a mix, because I think if you're only doing back squats and you're doing them at a really high volume, and then the following day you're trying to train upper body and you're realizing, oh, like that fatigue is starting to transfer over into my upper body day, then maybe you're in a position where you could benefit from shifting a little bit of that free weight lower body work to machines that aren't going to tax the entire body and be more lower body focused, so that you don't have that carryover fatigue for your upper body training.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. So again, there's going to be some individualization that goes into this. And I'm sure too that certain machines, probably just the way they're set up and where the resistance profile's at and whatnot, like that's going to probably alter potential fatigue as well too. Cause I feel like there's been some machines that I've done where it's, man, that just wrecks me. And then you do another one and it's like, I actually felt really good. So I'm assuming there's probably some of that as well too, that goes into it.
Yeah, absolutely. And, when we look at applying kind of evidence-based findings to an individual, we always need to be aware that both in the research and in practical experience, we don't all respond to the same thing, whether it's the amount of volume from which you can recover or the training frequency that really works well for you, or the success that you have on a particular machine, or the benefit that you get from a hypertrophy perspective from one exercise versus another. We see a lot of variability there. So we, of course, need to individualize our approach when it comes to programming. And that's why having a coach is incredibly valuable, of course.
Yeah, absolutely. Cool. Is there anything maybe that we missed on like machine versus free weights for hypertrophy? Is there anything maybe that you think is interesting, or yeah, something I didn't ask on the topic that you think is important?
I think one thing is the paper that I mentioned, that they compared the hypertrophy and strength gains in a machine-based group versus the free weight group. And one thing that they measured was hypertrophy of the rectus abdominis, which is not something we see that often. But there is this belief that free weight exercises require more core stabilization and are therefore superior or more functional, if you will. And if that were the case, we would actually expect there to be differences in abdominal hypertrophy and of the core musculature. And what we see in those findings is that the hypertrophy was identical. So it seems as if that belief that free weights are more requiring more core stabilization is probably unfounded, because it looks like, oh, I know, actually you're getting that core work from both types of training.
No, that's good insight, because that is another common thing that I hear, right? It's, oh, if like you said, yeah, if we don't do free weights, then you're not going to get that core stabilization. But from what it sounds like, you are still like, it's the same from either whether you do a free weight or a machine on that. So that kind of kicks that myth to the curb, which I think is great, because that's one of those things, yeah, that gets brought up all the time. And I do want to talk to you about functional training, and I think that will be a good tie in here. But before we dive into that side of things, is there, I guess from a practical application standpoint, it sounds like really the big kind of takeaway is, if you want to train for strength or build strength in a particular like movement, you do need to train that. Otherwise, if you're going for, like you said, general fitness, hypertrophy, you just have this large variety that you can work through. You don't have to necessarily stick with one thing or machines over free weights or vice versa there on that. Is there anything you want to add to that, or maybe you want to wrap up for the audience here on this topic?
No, I think that you nailed it. Main takeaways is it can be primarily based on preference, unless you have a competitive strength goal in mind that requires you to perform a specific exercise. And that if you are trying to really optimize hypertrophy all around, you probably should be including some machine-based work.
And I'm sure that's good news for a lot of people. Again, for me, it was like, I remember like when I first started getting into training, I was like, I wanted it to be more machine based. And then I started getting into personal training, and you'd read like the certifications, like, oh, you got to do free weights. And what we're going to talk about here, like more like functional type training. And now it's come back around as I've learned more about hypertrophy. It's, man, I think from like an injury prevention standpoint and things like that, fitting some machine work, cable work in is just invaluable, and everybody should do it. And again, I love that we have a ton of flexibility here with hypertrophy training. Cool. Yeah. So you hit on this. I know you talked about core stabilization and stuff, and this kind of falls under that umbrella, I feel like, of functional training, right? And I know you just recently wrote an article in Mass about functional training. So if you can maybe hit on this, because I hear this a lot of times of, oh, I want to get in better overall shape. We've been doing this bodybuilding style, hypertrophy style training for a while. I want to get to more functional training, stuff like that. And it's like, when I get asked that, I'm like, what do you mean by that? Because I feel like there is no, what does that look like and whatnot. So can we maybe hit on what it is, and then maybe some potential issues with issuing things as quote unquote functional?
Yeah, the paper that I reviewed for Mass basically pointed out that there is no universal definition of functional training. And that's really problematic because it's just thrown out there without any clear agreed upon definition. And therefore, it's very difficult to study from a research perspective because we need to all agree on what it is that we're talking about. And the buzzwords that are associated with functional training often include things like balance and stability, but they'll also include things like strength and activities of daily living. So some people would describe functional training as exercises that translate to activities that you would perform on a daily basis. And so they will make you better at picking things up or getting something out of the cabinet or some those types of tasks. Others would define it as sports specific or athletic specific training. So it's functional in that these exercises are going to transfer to your sports performance. And first, those are very dissimilar populations. And certainly those individuals would have different training programs. But in any case, we see these exercises that are prescribed as being quote unquote more functional are often we're taking a bilateral exercise and we're making it a unilateral exercise, or we're taking a standard exercise and we're combining another exercise with that. So instead of just doing a reverse lunge, you're going to do a reverse lunge while you do an overhead press. Or we're taking a standard exercise and we're putting it on an unstable surface like a BOSU or a stability ball. And when I was earning my first personal trainer certification, I remember this being really popular.
Yep.
And you'd see trainers at the gym doing everything on an unstable surface, or everything had to be this sort of combined two exercises into one. And I never really understood whether it was more beneficial, but the core stabilization piece was a huge one as a kind of argument as to why that would be superior. And the unstable surface training, while it was always used in the context of, oh, this is going to be more translatable to your activities of daily living, that's where you lost me. Because when are we standing on an unstable surface, like moving things, especially moving external load? I don't encounter that. I'm not sitting on an unstable surface, standing on an unstable surface. So the idea that particularly beginners or older people should be standing on a BOSU lifting weights is really unfounded and potentially unsafe as well. Yeah. I think that the injury risk is high, and even all of these coordinated movements where you're trying to do two things at once, the learning curve is higher. And so if we're trying to get people in the gym and building some muscle mass and building some strength, let's keep it simple. And the functional fitness paradigm seems to do the opposite of that. It seems to make it overly complicated without much benefit or explanation.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Those, like you said, the BOSU ball, that's, again, like you said, you're never going to be in that situation. If anything, that increases the likelihood of injury probably from with training. So maybe where do you think this kind of myth comes from of, oh, if I just do quote unquote bodybuilding style training or just lift weights, it's not going to be quote unquote functional?
I'm not sure where it came from, but the term functional fitness has been around for 20 plus years at this point, and it's really popular in the group fitness space as well. And so I think as a buzzword, as a kind of marketing term, that's where it has had success. And so people have really latched on to that, but it really isn't rooted in evidence. And I think that's very important to realize when we look at the primary benefits of resistance training. It's building strength and building muscle mass. And those are not only going to be important for people who are pursuing strength and physique related goals, it's also important for improving body composition. It's also important for long-term physical function as you age. It helps preserve your kind of quality of life, your mobility. And all of that comes back to having and maintaining muscle mass and being able to use that muscle mass. So when we think about the term core stability, for example, and you exercises like dead bugs and various planks come to mind.
Yep.
But interestingly, those exercises while they're incredibly popular in group fitness and in personal training, there's not a lot of support for them from a scientific perspective. And stabilizing the spine is really a function of the contractile potential of the muscles, having muscle, and then the usage of that potential. So being able to use it through activation of the central nervous system. And that is muscle force production. So contractile potential and the use of that potential. And all of that is accomplished very well with traditional resistance training. And when you're doing one of these more targeted core exercises, or when you're using an unstable surface, or when you're transitioning from a bilateral exercise to a unilateral version of that exercise, you end up sacrificing muscle force production because you necessarily have to use less load. So while this is supposedly targeting physical function, it's actually not conducive to that goal when you think about what you are sacrificing by adjusting the programming in that fashion. So really what we're aiming for for physical function is muscle mass and strength. And in order to
Yeah, no, that makes a ton of sense, because it's like the things we want there are the muscle and the strength. And maybe it's just like people that, I don't know if it's just maybe some myths around muscle. Oh, hey, if you just train, you're just going to be this massive bodybuilder and whatnot. And we know that's obviously not the case. So I'm wondering if maybe those two go hand in hand there with it. But like you said, it's by building muscle, a lot of these things are going to improve. And then by some of these things that we call quote unquote functional, they end up actually hurting your ability to build muscle. So is there any application where you could see anything like this potentially being in a program or anything like that?
I think there's also an element of trainers or group fitness instructors feeling pressured to be creative and be novel and come up, quote unquote, come up with a new exercise. And I really caution against that, because creativity and variety doesn't make you a better trainer. Consistency is what is going to give your clients the most success. So variety for the sake of variety, it really doesn't make sense for resistance training. I think that if you are somebody who enjoys unilateral training, then there's nothing wrong with doing that. When I say that variety for the sake of variety doesn't make sense, I don't mean you should pick these 5 exercises and never do anything else. I think we need to keep in mind that clients are willing to maybe do the same program for 2 months, 3 months, and then it starts to feel stale and you want to mix it up, but you mix it up in a way that is still going to move you towards your goals. And so I think incorporating some unilateral training is totally valid and a reasonable option. And there are benefits to doing that. But I think doing that across the board just because is very different than saying, you know what, we've been doing these squats for a while or leg press for a while, let's do some lunges. Or we've been doing RDLs and I'm feeling like low back is getting fatigued, let's try some single leg RDLs, because you can get a really good challenge to the musculature with using less load. And so that is an example where I think that you should totally feel free to incorporate a unilateral exercise. The unstable surface training really may have a place in rehab or physical therapy, but outside of that, training on an unstable surface does not translate to training on a stable surface. So, assuming you have the desire to improve your performance on unstable surfaces, yeah, that's sports specific. But I think, I don't know, I guess maybe if you're a surfer, there's an application there. But I think for the most part, people are doing those exercises for no reason. And the potential risk, it does not outweigh the benefit, because the benefit of doing the exercises on unstable surfaces is not something that we're really seeing.
Yeah, and I like too that you brought up the variety aspect of it. Like, hey, we're not saying you only have to do 3 exercises forever. You can switch things up. It's just like you said, the just don't have that variety in there just to change things up. And I definitely, when I first started training in person, I definitely felt that same thing, right? Where it's you have these clients, you're new to training, you want to keep them, you want to get more clients, and it does become this kind of competition of who can come up with the most creative workout. And then it's you got to be changing stuff up. And if a client mentions that they're getting somewhat bored at all, you're like, oh crap, I got to change things up. And it's, oh man, you really unfortunately are probably doing them a little bit of a disservice there. Obviously getting people moving is going to be key and important, but for trying to, people want to see results, and that's probably not the best way to go about that. So from the core stability standpoint, because this is one that I think super common as well too. Oh, I really feel like my core is weak. I feel like I need to do more core work. What are your kind of thoughts around that? It sounds like you said that just from by training, like doing like squats, stuff like that should be pretty good there with that. But is there anything around that, like any thoughts there with the core stability thing and when somebody comes to you with that issue? Because I'm sure you've heard that before from people reaching out or clients as well.
For sure. Yeah. In writing this article for Mass, I was surprised to discover that the efficacy of many of the exercises that are your tried and true core exercises have never been tested. And so there really isn't a scientific basis for prescribing them to clients. And further, there's no just as there's no universal definition of functional training, there's also not a universal definition of the core and of core stabilization. And some people would include the musculature that allows you to flex and extend the spine or rotate the spine. Sometimes it includes the pelvic area as well, and sometimes it doesn't. And so I think if you are looking to maximize hypertrophy of the abdominal musculature, in the sense that you want to see your abs, then you need to treat them the way that you would treat any other muscle. You need to use load, don't do 500 crunches, and you need to progressively overload over time. And that will build hypertrophy of the abdominal muscles. And same thing would go for the lower back. If we're talking full like core, if everything is from the shoulders to the hips. But the efficacy of doing targeted core exercises to strengthen the core really doesn't seem to be founded in evidence, because when you're doing a targeted core exercise, you are sacrificing the load that you would be using in your barbell squat, for example. And so when you are using the central nervous system and your muscle mass, your contractile potential, and to perform your exercise, then you are by definition improving your core stability, because the spine has to stabilize in order for you to move the weight. And so when people say they think their core is weak or they think their core is a limiting factor, I think it's often actually their back muscles that is weak. And so if you do more back exercises, and then you build muscle mass and strength from that, then you might find that it will translate to your deadlift performance or your but in the absence of that, doing a lot of static holds or one arm planks is something that really doesn't translate to performance of your lifts in the gym.
And they're freaking boring to be doing all that. So you mentioned like back exercises, and I never really thought of it that way before. I think that's a really good insight. So are you talking specifically like just any back exercises there on that, like upper back, lats, everything like that, low back particular, or yeah, would there be anything like any exercises there with that you would consider?
So and this is really speaking from my personal experience, but I
Right.
find that I'm often with female clients who are really set on prioritizing training of their lower body, that then when you're looking to perform lower body exercises that require upper body
Sure.
strength or assistance from the upper body, that then we really see this come into play. And so if you are doing like a well-rounded, balanced full body training throughout the week, then I think you probably don't have this issue. But if you're somebody who is doing a lot more pushing than pulling, or a lot more lower body than upper body, then we might see this come into play. And I think that doing your basic horizontal pull, vertical pull, is the bread and butter of any back training program. And then if you want to go beyond that, then I would do something for the rear delts and potentially something for the low back. But I think that's probably unnecessary if you're doing other hinge movements. Yeah, I really think that this is something that people think is an issue more often than it actually being a real issue.
Yeah.
But the way that it's often addressed is probably inappropriate.
Oh, sorry. I didn't know if you had anything else that you wanted to add to that. But yeah, no, that makes a ton of sense. I like I said, I never really thought of that. And two, with the back, like you said, a lot of people do opt for. Well, you have two ways to look at this. You have people, like you said, typically women will train a little bit more lower body versus upper body, and then men will typically train more pushing versus pulling, right? So you see that the back doesn't get hit as much. But I also think the back is also probably a muscle group where it can be a little bit tougher, I feel, to actually utilize those back muscles a lot of times as well too. So there's probably that going on there as well too with that. But no, I think that was a really good insight there. What about, is there any, for example, postpartum, would you say that could be a time where you could potentially implement something like this? Or again, you think it's still the same type of thing here where it just comes down to, hey, strengthening your back, just getting back into weight training? Or do you think maybe they have a little bit of an increased need around that time period? Or yeah, what are your thoughts around that?
Yeah, I think potentially, especially if you're somebody who had a C-section, for example, then you need to be really careful about getting back into lifting, and just also training while you're pregnant if you can. There's still a kind of school of thought that if you're pregnant, you shouldn't lift weights or you shouldn't exercise at all. And that can be really problematic because for the most part, women who are already exercising can continue doing that exercise for at least the majority of their pregnancy, of course, with some exceptions. But I think there are potential applications of this also in a rehab setting, maybe. But if you're just looking to implement a well-rounded program, then there's often some sort of assumption like, oh wait, we're missing the core exercises. And I've had people say this to me,
Yeah.
and my response is, if you want to, go for it. If it's something you enjoy doing and you want to do it, then sure, because it's not going to hurt you.
Right.
And the kind of fatigue or that you would generate is minimal. And if you want to do it as a warm up or you want to do it at the end of your workout, then that's fine. I would say the same thing about stretching. But the thought that you're missing something if you don't do those, that's where I think we need to correct that misunderstanding.
Yeah, no, I love that. It's if you want to do it, you enjoy it. It's like, all right, we can fit it in. Is it the most time efficient thing we could be doing? Probably not. But again, you do need to take the client and the person into consideration there. Because again, as we've talked about all this stuff around hypertrophy, it's the individualization is key, and finding something that somebody can stick with, I think ends up being probably the most important aspect out of it there with that. Cool. Really appreciated that kind of conversation around that. I think that dispelled a lot of myths and definitely will help people reevaluate what they do from a training perspective there on that. If we have just a little bit of time left here, and I know you said some of your research is around sex differences from like a hypertrophy standpoint. So I was just curious to hear if there's anything maybe that's come out in the last couple of years that's maybe like changed your mind around this in terms of hypertrophy differences between men and women, and then maybe is there anything like coming out here in the near future around that topic?
I think the most common assumption is that men are set up for superior hypertrophic potential or strength potential when compared to women. And that is really rooted in the belief that testosterone drives hypertrophy. And we do see that during adolescence and the development of secondary sex characteristics, there's a large secretion of testosterone in adolescent boys that is not occurring in adolescent girls. And so with the development of those secondary sex characteristics, we do see a gain in muscle mass during those puberty years. So meaning as adults, when men and women start lifting weights, they're coming from a different starting point. So an untrained male will have more muscle than an untrained female. That said, once you start lifting, the rate of gain or the relative strength or muscle mass that we can see you put on is very similar between men and women. So while on an absolute basis, the men are still going to be bigger and stronger, the growth potential from a kind of percentage based perspective is very similar. And so I think the focus on the sex hormones is something that is been around for a very long time. Testosterone has been extensively studied. And what we see in men is that it's as long as you're within what is a large normal range, it's not predictive of your long-term potential in terms of gaining muscle and gaining strength. So while it's super important with that initial bout of muscle growth during adolescence, it's not going to be the dictator of your response to training for the rest of your life, assuming you are within a pretty broad normal range. If you are below that range, then we might see some issues in the response to training. And of course, if you're above that range in the sense that this is a super physiological level and we're taking exogenous hormones, then we see that's a huge advantage. But when you're thinking about no drugs and like normal endocrine functioning, then the presence of testosterone is really only important during those kind of formative years where we're putting on the muscle as a function of growth and development. When we look at the response to training, it's not that driver of hypertrophy that we might maybe once thought it was 20 years ago. So our understanding of the influence of testosterone has changed. The influence of the ovarian hormones, so the female sex hormones, is less known and has not been studied as much. And that's one of the major focuses of my thesis. But currently, the kind of state of the evidence is not showing that it would be hugely influential, meaning that if you are a woman who is on a hormonal contraceptive versus a woman who has a natural menstrual cycle, you're probably going to be similarly primed for adaptations to training, and you don't need to worry about that being a major contributing factor to how you respond.
Yeah, no, that makes a ton of sense. Again, probably counterintuitive to what most people think. So you mentioned like things like testosterone and then the female sex hormones don't like you don't think they play a massive role past, like you said, the initial like kind of time frame of when you're younger there in terms of testosterone? Would it just come down to then to like genetics, like lifestyle, and then also like just how you train and stuff like that too? I'm assuming are probably the bigger factors there from like a muscle growth standpoint.
For sure. We see a huge variability in response training. And I'm sure you've seen that as a coach, but we certainly see that in the research. No matter what program you put people through, there are people who respond a little bit, and there are people who respond a ton, and then there's a lot of people who are in the middle. So when we think about the results of training studies, we're generally reporting group averages. But as an individual, you might be way above or way below that average. And so I think that there's certainly a genetic component there, which we can't really control. But that's one of the huge contributing factors. You can't pick your parents, so you've got what you've got.
Yep.
And those things apply to your, not only maybe your upper potential, but also things like your height and your muscle insertions and your muscle bellies. And once you do put on muscle mass, you might look different than the person next to you. And those are a lot of factors that you can't control. What we can control is the training program, the way that we progress that training program, and our nutrition, and then your sleep and your stress and the other kind of factors around that. But I think that the focus on the things you can't control is probably not a very productive one. So we have to work with what we've got.
Especially when it comes to hypertrophy as well too. Is there anything that from a programming perspective or anything that you tend to, again, I'm sure there's not really anything in the research that shows this, maybe there is, but is there any training considerations you have or programming considerations between men and women, or anything that you notice in terms of like how you might program for either sex?
My opinion currently is, based on the science and based on everything, is that the difference between us as individuals in the way that we respond is probably more variable than the difference between men and women, period. So it's more a function of inter-individual variability than a difference between biological sex. Because when we look at just adaptations to training, the physiology is very similar. The obvious difference is the sex hormones. But as I said, and that's why it's something that we're interested in studying. But with all of the other kind of physiological processes that go into gaining muscle and gaining strength, they're very similar between the sexes. And so from a programming perspective, I would train some males and females differently, just simply because their goals are different. So I've never had a female client come to me and say, I really want to build my upper traps, for example. So we're probably not doing shrugs and we're probably not doing as much chest work as well. And I'm generalizing here, but
Right.
And same thing for doing a lot of glute accessory work for men. There are some men who want to incorporate that, but generally it's those physique based differences that are based on preference, and we see sex differences in preference for those kind of physique adaptations, but those are the way that I would respond to any sort of training goal. And there's nothing sort of sex specific about that other than the fact that, hey, I want to build this, let's program an appropriate exercise for that goal.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. So again, just like you said, for typically you're not going to see any women that want to do upper traps, and then vice versa. Men typically don't want to do like a ton of glute work. Like you said, you may see that, but it's just less likely there with that. So again, just really coming down to personal preference. I guess the last thing on this, what about from like this? I know that there was this thought that maybe women can typically recover a little bit quicker. They might be able to handle a little bit more volume. Is that something that you typically see there with that, or is again that just very individual?
Yeah, my response would be the same, in that the difference between individuals is big there. There's some evidence to suggest that there's like potential sex differences, but it's not strong enough to translate that in a practical way for most people. And so I think we need to be really careful about looking at a potential mechanism or a potential finding, or a potential metabolic difference, and then saying, oh, this means that every woman or every man should be doing this. I think when it comes to coaching for an individual client and programming for an individual client, that there is certainly going to be some trial and error, and you'll often find that you'll have clients who recover really quickly, and wow, they can squat 3 times a week. That's crazy. I can't. And there are people who will be able to handle a lot of volume, and then others won't. And even the clients that can, maybe can't indefinitely. That's going to be cyclical. So I think it is much more beneficial to the client to implement a program and then adjust and respond accordingly, as opposed to being like, oh, you should be able to do more, or you should be recovering faster. It's, are you or aren't you? Let's work with the results and adjust your training accordingly.
Awesome. Yeah, no, and again, I think that's a good thing overall. It's a positive that there really are no differences there. Now, I know you said you guys are doing a little bit more research in terms of the female sex hormones, correct? In terms of some differences there, but that's going now. Is there anything maybe that we missed here on this topic, or anything that you'd like to end this kind of topic on?
I'm not sure that this is still out there as much as it used to be, but just in going back to the kind of percentage of your starting point, I know there used to be this huge misconception that if women lift heavy weights, like they're going to get huge. And if you're somebody who's been around the industry and the drug-free lifting industry for a while, like we rarely see these jacked women. Like, where are they? So putting on muscle size is difficult. And given that the women are starting at a lower starting point relative to men, I think that there should be very little fear around getting too big. And the benefits of putting on muscle are certainly documented, not only for changing your physique for the better, but also for the health benefits. And so I hope that's not something that is still out there in the industry, because I recall seeing a lot of women wasting their time with the 2-pound dumbbells, thinking that they were building like leaner, longer muscle, as opposed to doing proper training and then observing the results and reaping the benefits of that proper training.
Yeah, and as you're saying this too, it starts to make sense as to maybe why you don't see as many jack women out there, right? Is because maybe it falls back to what we talked about earlier, where maybe again people fall prey to the, oh, you need to be doing this functional type training, and then it's not as beneficial for hypertrophy. And then there's also just the thought process of, oh, I don't want to just train like a bodybuilder. That's probably going to be the best for hypertrophy. So that's maybe where all this kind of stems from there on that. So no, I'm glad you talked about that. And there's a ton of great information in here today too. I feel like we busted a lot of myths around hypertrophy training in here. Before I let you go, is there anything that you're currently working on that you want to let the audience know about? And then just let the audience know where they can find you.
Sure. Thanks so much. This was a great conversation. As we mentioned earlier in the chat, I'm finishing up my PhD, so I will be publishing some work around the influence of sex hormones, mainly menstrual cycle phase-based training, and also the influence of oral contraceptives on the muscle protein synthetic response to resistance training. So stay tuned for that. I'm also a member of the Mass Research Review team. So if anyone is interested in checking that out, monthly subscription for Research Review, a lot of great content. We also recently started doing office hours on YouTube live at 7 p.m. Eastern time every Wednesday. And that's open to subscribers and non-subscribers if anyone would like to check out that. And you can find me on Instagram at LaurenCS1.
Awesome. Yeah, no, the office hours has been awesome. It's a really cool addition that you guys had there, and that there's a ton of great information in there. Like you said, it's free. So if you don't listen to that, you got to make sure you do it. So again, Lauren, appreciate your time. Thank you for coming on, and we will chat with you again in the future.
Great. Thanks.